Welcome to Narcissist Apocalypse Q&A, everyone. I am Brandon Chadwick, and with me today we have Bobby Thrasher. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for being here. For everyone who's listening today, Bobby Thrasher has been practicing law for 12 years and specializes in child sexual abuse. And he works at monsemare.com. Monsemare is a law firm in Kansas City, Missouri, and you work on a lot of different cases when it comes to sexual abuse. And a big one that we're going to talk about today is the Circle of Hope Girls Ranch that involves like a severe cases of abuse and neglect. And we're going to talk about that case. We're going to talk about your role, how you just don't have to do the law, but probably have to be very supportive with everyone, and I guess the advocating for um, maybe the abolishment of these places or laws put in place so these things don't happen maybe again as well. So
Absolutely.
I guess start off here, like tell us what is the Circle of Hope Girls Ranch and everything, the allegations that went on there.
Sure. Yeah, Circle of Hope Girls Ranch was a reformatory boarding school for obviously women only, as its title indicates. They opened in the summer of 2006 in a small town in rural southern Missouri. They really quickly after they opened the doors, reports of abuse kind of started flooding in. The issue that a lot of these victims ran into were um, not not being believed or not, when they would report these to authorities or local police departments and local, organizations, they were not being passed on to people that could and effectuate change. These girls were dropped off at Circle of Hope for a number of reasons, whether it be that their parents could no longer properly parent them, whether they were running from home, whether they had some sort of drug or alcohol abuse issues. Um, they were brought to this school to not only be reformed, but with the promise that uh, the regimen put in place by Circle of Hope would, turn them into functioning, um, you know, young women. Because at the time, when they would quote unquote graduate this place, they would have had been brought into um, a religious program. Um, they would, which is part of their reform plan, they would get adequate um, schooling. They would, be able to follow rules and instruction. They would, the the school would feed them, but it was also, like I said, there was this education component, there was a religious component, but there were chores. They were really taking part of, taking some ownership of this ranch and doing things to to help the ranch run, to help the school run, to help the boarding school run. It closed its doors in 2020, um, and really, um, it really was following 2020, following the closure of the school, where a lot of these girls were able to not necessarily find their voice, but where their voices were starting to be heard because they were finally able to tell their stories in a non-censored environment. And it kind of was one of those things where there's smoke, there's fire. You hear one account, you hear a couple accounts, you hear a dozen accounts, you hear multiple accounts, um, and people start paying attention, and that is where not only the school got shut down, but the owners and operators of that school were placed in jail, um, because it came out that there was just rampant abuse that was occurring, unfortunately, at Circle of Hope.
So who funds a school or a ranch like this?
Yeah. So the parents who are sending their children. I mean, these boarding schools are expensive. They're thousands of dollars a month, if not tens of thousands of dollars a month. So these schools, they're they're making a lot of money, and what we have learned and what we have uncovered is the money is not necessarily going back into the school or for the well-being of the kids that are there. They are being used to line the pockets of the owners, um, and it's a huge money making business for the householders who ran Circle of Hope, but also other boarding schools and other institutions across Missouri, unfortunately.
So I guess my follow-up here is, how do these schools get accreditation? And is there any oversight within the state of Missouri? And is that something that you fight for? Or is that something for other lawyers to fight for?
So they don't have necessarily any accreditation as it comes to their schooling or their promised educational components, which we have found out that they barely attended school. We're talking a couple hours, maybe a week. But if you were deemed a problem child, school was the first thing taken away from you, and additional chores or a different corporal punishment was added to your day as opposed to school. So there is no real accreditation for the educational components of these places, as it pertains to a number of these boarding schools and Circle of Hope. Once they allege or have a religious component to them, the the state, at least in Missouri, um, there's really no oversight or regulations because you have the whole separation of church and state, and once you have a religious purpose or you have a religious component, the state, as the law is written in Missouri, the state really cannot regulate or have any oversight really whatsoever as to your operation, and unfortunately, that is made Missouri a sanctuary state of sorts for these types of quote unquote religious organizations that are masking themselves as a religious institution, which is turning into corporal punishment, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse. So um, the laws have kind of created and fostered this environment. As to your question, whether that change of the law or the change of the regulations and oversight, if that's something we do or whether that's reserved for others, we have joined the fight to change the laws in Missouri. We have actively, um, been down to Jefferson City, the capital of Missouri, and we have been lobbying and testifying to try to not only change the way the laws are written, as it pertains to you know, these perceived religious organizations and the deregulation of them, if you will. But we've also been down trying to change the law to extend the amount of time, extend the statute of limitations individuals have to bring lawsuits. Um, Circle of Hope was a boarding school for adolescent children. They would come in, um, you know, in their you know in their early teens, but we have kids there that were there about as young as 10, and they would, like I said, they would accept young women all the way, or young girls all the way up until the age of 18. Um, in Missouri, if you suffer abuse as a minor when you are younger than 18, you re- at the end of the day, you have until you're 26 to bring a lawsuit. And a lot of these girls, um, once again, they're coming out in their high school years or at the age of 18. None of their education transfers. They rarely received any actual credits that would transfer to any American schools, let alone colleges. So they were not only behind in their academic careers, but all of them suffered some form of abuse. Once again, whether that is being manipulated and suffering emotional abuse, all the way up to very severe accounts of sexual abuse. Most all the girls were physically abused in some manner, mainly by use of physical restraints. So not only are these girls, leaving this boarding school that they've been at, they're trying to, find their way in society again and in the quote unquote real world, but they're navigating, you know, they're navigating severe trauma. Um, they're trying to, you know, uh, make sense of the abuse they've suffered. They're woefully uneducated. So the time is ticking against them during this entire process, and we have found that a lot of disclosures, a lot of victims or survivors of these institutions, that they really aren't in a place to um, you know retread all of their experiences, retread all their trauma, and file a lawsuit and take on a place like Circle of Hope uh, until much later in life, until they have their feet under them, until they can really, um, digest everything that had happened. Um, and so we're finding 26 is not a reasonable amount of time for a minor to bring a lawsuit. So we're also, in a very long-winded answer, we're also trying to extend the statute of limitations for individuals, such as those students of Circle of Hope, to bring lawsuits in Missouri, as a lot of them are now time barred.
I have so many questions, and I don't know which one to ask because I don't want to go in a different direction and lose those questions. But I guess first, you know, when it comes to these institutions, what is their end goal? Like, are they trying to make um, better Christians? Um, do some of them have a component of labor aspect to it? I don't know if that is something that goes on there. And a follow up to that would be within the work that you're doing. What is the pushback that you're getting, if any, from organizations that are on the side of the churches, and what is their argument against abuse, and how do you challenge that?
Yeah, all great questions, and I will try to provide answers to all of them. The end goal question is obviously one we would like to know for ourselves from a lot of these owners and these institutions. I do believe that um, they set out to be a controlled religious environment, right? So they're pushing some sort of agenda, um, that is ingrained in these owners and operators, and I think they are trying to reform young individuals, in their own once again in their own lane of whatever religious teaching that they have, decided to, I guess, pursue. I think their end goal becomes money. I think they are making a lot of money off these individuals and their parents. They do, part of their corporal punishment, part of their boarding school regimen is yeah, child labor, forced labor. They're but it's used as punishment. You're not mopping the floors. You're cleaning the floors with toothbrushes, or and if you don't do that, you're not eating, right? And so it becomes a very, like I said, controlled, punishing environment where you know every kid you have there is a dollar sign. They are paying for a bed if the bed's not taken away from the resident. Um, but once again, they are making money, and I think that unfortunately becomes the end goal for a lot of these places. Is um, it, no one's going to believe what's going on here. All these kids are troubled anyway. All of these kids are lost. This is a much better, they convince themselves that they're giving these kids much better lives than they have outside of the place, and they're making a lot of money off of them. So in my unfettered, opinion, I think the end goal is making money, um, only because the the handful of schools and these boarding schools we've dealt with, and we have been successful in shutting down. They have not been operating boarding schools. They have not been keeping up to, they're over promising, under delivering. It's not as advertised. They're there to, um, you know, quote unquote, treat or reform kids, and it's turned into in the name of abuse. So they're not great places, and that is due to a lot of the laws and the lack of oversight. The pushback we do see, at least from the religious institutions, or the lack of regulation on ministries or churches, is, there is the separation of church and state. There are constitutional protections, that, you know religious organizations operating properly and not in the name of abuse, they do get to enjoy some of those constitutional protections, and they are supposed to be separate from the government and from state regulation. So the constitutional protections, the constitutional arguments, is mainly what is in opposition to us, especially when talking about regulating religious organizations. So, we have looked into, once again, these non-traditional religious organizations, right? These boarding schools, these, camps, residential treatment facilities that may have a religious component, once again, to skirt state regulation. We're trying to draw some sort of, make some distinctions there, and draw some lines as, okay, the state's not going to come in and run your Catholic church, run your religious organization, but there has to be some checks and balances. There has to be some oversights, especially if, there are complaints, or there are instances within the organization that, call into question what is actually going on there. When it comes to extending the statute of limitations for children who have suffered sexual abuse, we normally run into the insurance industry, the insurance lobbies. These insurance companies are providing insurance for a lot of these institutions, a lot of these summer camps, and they don't want to have to insure something that should never be insurable in the first place, right? It's just a common argument in opposition to really anything, when you try to extend the time limit, provide someone a longer amount of time to hold someone accountable. There's arguments as, that the people still may not be there that were perpetrating the abuse, or the evidence is no longer there. But it really comes down to a money issue as well, I guess, with the insurance companies. But that's really who opposes those extensions of the statute of limitations, whether it be for child sexual abuse or really anything.
So I'll rephrase. So for a school like that, or the circle, the ranch, they're getting insured. The insurance company doesn't do due diligence and is gladly taking money, and then at the end, in a way, they now don't want to pay out because they didn't do their homework. Because if they did their homework, for the most part, I assume these people would never have gotten insurance in the first place, or it would have taken time for, do insurance companies have to take some sort of responsibility that if you're going to insure someone, that you yourself have to do proper checks every single year to see what's really going on?
Sure. Yeah. So there is an aspect of that for insurance companies. Absolutely. It's normally, the burden is normally placed on the people they're insuring, their insureds. If, once again, if one of these individuals makes a complaint about abuse going on, once again, the proper channels were not in place for that to really happen. So the organization the organization starts concealing that information. They don't necessarily report it to the insurance company. Um, but in to answer your question, yes, the insurance company should know what's going on with their insured's place of business, with what is happening there. Um, but in a situation where their insureds or the schools are not properly communicating, um, they can. There are avenues or there are vehicles for the insurance company to go after their own insureds, I guess, because the line of communication is not open. They're not being they're not being provided the information they should be by the insureds. So it kind of does be the insurance company does get put in a hard spot there. But once again, the second that there is a red flag or the second they are made aware of anything, the insurance company, has the option to do the right thing and either pay out those claims and not dispute them, not fight them, or once again, decline an insurance going forward for the institution. And the insurance companies obviously they're in the business of collecting those premiums. And yeah, they do need to assess risk, right? And maybe um, you know, the riskier person you are, the riskier business you're running, the nature of the business you're running, those premiums go up and they're, of course happy to accept those increased premiums. So yeah, they're not completely off the hook or they're not completely in the dark. Um, and and that is why, they have had to cover a lot of these claims for insuring a um a girls ranch who was perpetrating abuse over, more than a decade.
I wanted to get back to Amanda Householder, who is the daughter of Boyd and Stephanie Householder, and those were the people who were running that ranch. And Amanda Householder, at first, was denying that her parents were abusers, but after she did something very brave, which is she actually listened to the people who were coming forth with the abuse, from what I understand. And then she switched her belief about who her parents were. So, can you talk about her? Because I know you've talked to her before, and what kind of you deal with people who are dealing with abuse, what kind of struggle that is to come to even the terms with that you were abused and talking about it and the advocacy you have for them, and what you've learned from them as well during this process.
Yeah, so um as we've talked about or at least mentioned briefly, so the Circle of Hope was ultimately closed or shut down in 2020. And that was really in response to an initial wave of claims being made, an initial wave of lawsuits being made against Circle of Hope for the abuse that was being perpetrated there by Boyd and Stephanie, both householders. So they were a married couple, or they are a married couple. Boyd is no longer living, but they were married. They were running Circle of Hope Girls Ranch, and they both were complicit and participated in a lot of the abuse that we have learned of and uncovered. Their daughter Amanda uh, more or less lived at Circle of Hope. Was later a on staff or a council member or a counselor at Circle of Hope. Um, and yeah, she was totally ingrained into this way of life, and she knew nothing else. So, um, we were talking about the types of abuse suffered. The manipulation, the emotional and mental abuse is is a very powerful um, thing. Not only when you're attending a place like this and you're forced to live in a certain way, forced to believe certain beliefs. um, you once again you get brainwashed, right? You are manipulated. She being the daughter of Boyd and Stephanie, this was her life. So um, she was affected, I think, a lot more. Well, I don't want to compare the severity levels, but she lived, like I said, there was no exit for her. This was her life. So when the school got shut down in 2020, and other individuals were finding their voice and getting support of others, Amanda was very, very in denial, if you will. She um, was not, um, she did not agree with a lot of the claims. She denied everything that kind of was being said, and was siding with her parents. I think, um, you know, and I think she has said this before, but not only the manipulation that she suffered and that she once again had to kind of, pull the wool out from over her own eyes, but I think she also, there was a part of her that, she was part of some of the corporal punishment. She was part of some of the physical restraints that are now, that now we know is physical abuse and completely unreasonable uh, use of I guess, physical restraints. Um, but she was part of that. So some of it was, her ignorance as to knowing that this was not okay, and that this was normal, or that this is what, everyone quote unquote signed up for. But I think some of her was, I don't want to get in trouble myself. I was told to do some of this stuff. I was making kids, clean things. I was ordering people around. But in 2022, a couple of years after, kind of like you alluded to, she started listening. She started, kind of, looking more, inwardly at her experiences and how maybe they were not normal, and she tried to, unnormalize her normal, what she knew her life to be as normal, and ended up suing her parents. So she is now advocating against her parents, advocating against Circle of Hope, and has really become a very supportive person and, asset to others who are trying to kind of uncover and figure out exactly what happened to them at Circle of Hope as well.
So, as a lawyer dealing with all of this, you have your job as your lawyer. But part of you has to be someone who's caring and understanding and listens. So, what's your experience with dealing with survivors of abuse, and what is the most important thing for you to do when talking with them and helping them, for all the other lawyers who might be listening right now who might not do a great job when it comes to, you know, fully understanding what an abuse victim survivor goes through.
Yeah, no, I mean, great question. And we started really at Monty's and Mayor. We really started focusing as a firm on these child sexual abuse cases. Um, really about 8 years ago, I think. We had a couple come through our doors, um, and we were able to help those individuals. Um, and we also had to come to grips that we can't help everybody, right? So we had to learn how to not only help those individuals who we could help, but also, um, turn down or guide those who we can't help to some sort of healthy environment or healthy resolution for themselves. So we reached out here in Kansas City, Missouri. We reached out to an organization, called MOXA. The acronym is MOCSA. It's the Metropolitan Organization Combating Sexual Abuse. They do a lot of non-for-profit work, for sexual abuse survivors, and children who suffer sexual abuse. We partnered with them, and we had them uh, train us on being trauma informed. So all of the lawyers in our firm and our staff, our intake specialists, everybody goes through a training each year, trauma informed training, and it not only teaches you how to listen more than speak. It emphasizes, giving the client, giving the survivor the control back, right? So whether it is a past resident of Circle of Hope, Girls Ranch, or someone else who has been abused in their home, maybe they have not. They're just finding their voice. It takes them a lot of courage to even call an attorney, let alone show up to an attorney's office. So we let them make a lot of decisions, right? We give them the control. If they don't want to come to our office, we'll meet them where they feel most comfortable. If they do come into our office, and they don't want to speak to, just a male, we'll we'll allow them to invite somebody else into the meeting, or we have some females on our staff that can come in, make them as comfortable as possible. Um, Understand that they're not going to necessarily be in a situation to give you all the answers you want in your initial meeting or even the second or third meetings. We also protect their story. Once again, it takes them a lot of courage to show up and begin uh, even talking about a potential case that they may have. When they do, when that trust has been built and established and their comfort is there, we we have them tell their story, and we try to make it in a way where they're not telling it, to us every single time we talk to them, right? Or if we have to prepare them for a deposition or a court hearing where they may have to, retread through their abuse or retell their story, uh, we spend a lot of time with them in preparation. So the the intake meeting, the first couple meetings are really obviously very hard for both, sitting there as an attorney, but also for the client, and it's just a huge trust building process where we respect the boundaries as much as we can. We lay out all of the expectations so that they know. Um, exactly what's coming down the line. If their deposition is coming up, we're not telling them the week before, we're not telling them the month before. We're giving them enough time so they can get comfortable, so that they are at a place, you know, where they feel ready and okay to share their story with obviously strangers, who maybe they have told before who have not believed them. So the trauma informed training is a huge part of what we do just to prepare ourselves so that we can serve our clients better. But also, as you've kind of mentioned, it takes a huge toll on us and our staff. Like I said, not only helping individuals, being able to help individuals, but also, not being able to help um, everybody who calls or everybody who comes to our office. So we try to take our mental health breaks as well. So um, if someone is at their wits end or if someone needs a break, we obviously try to honor that and give them the space they need and give them just kind of the step back, or if they need to leave the office, or like I said, get out of the case for a little while, that's fine too. But it does take a toll. It's a very unfortunate position, I guess, to be in, because there are so many stories and cases of abuse. But we, we like to think our clients are fortunate that, unfortunately, we're well versed in all that, and we know hopefully how to help them. So
So last question before we leave today. There's something called HB 883. So can you talk about what that is and how it is transformative?
yeah, so it House Bill 883 is a bill going through the Missouri legislature, and like I said, we're championing a lot of bills right now. Um, Not only for religious organizations, but for non-disclosure agreements. But 883, it does modify, like I said, the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. Um, your listeners may be aware, or you may be aware that a lot of states have enacted what they call window legislation, um, where there may be a 2 or 3 year period of time where anybody can bring a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit for sexual abuse, no matter if their statute of limitations is expired or they're time barred. They're for the amount of time the window is open, anybody can bring a claim for civil sexual abuse. We're trying to do that in Missouri. Um, we're trying to remove the statute of limitations for child sexual abuse. We're trying to make it retroactive so that individuals who have attended Circle of Hope, who may be older than the age of 26, or those who may have been abused in Boy Scouts or the Catholic Church, whatever it may be, and they're now time barred. We're trying to get the law to look backwards as well as forwards, and we're working with the legislators of Missouri to try to enact those provisions so the statute of limitations does not stand in the way of a victim bringing a claim.
And if you had one more thing to say to everyone that you wanted them to know before we go, what would it be?
Question everything and protect protect your kids, protect the ones you love. And like I said, um, you know we're not only trying to help victims and survivors navigate their own lives following a very traumatic time in their lives. We're also trying to make sure that these institutions, these boarding schools, that they're not um, that they're not hiring individuals, that they're not harboring perpetrators. We're trying to stop the abuse, so it's not happening anymore. We can keep the kids safe.
Well, Bobby Thrasher, I really want to thank you for being here with us today, sharing a wealth of information so people can learn about what's going on with places like this ranch in Missouri. And I'm going to leave all of your information that you work for Montse and Mayor out of Kansas City. We'll leave that in the show notes with the links for everything if they need to get into touch with you. And just a really big thank you today for putting a spotlight on this, and for anyone who's listening to feel like you know there's people out there that are willing to fight for them, and people that are good like you. So just a big thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for giving us the time, and thanks for giving us the platform. Always appreciate it.